I think we've all heard the statistic of buildings being responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, and I think that number probably applies elsewhere. But in cities like New York, the number is even higher.
I also feel like architects can help make spaces that inspire people to address the other 60% of the emissions.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Hey, and welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland International Airport.
Yeah, where are you off to?
I'm off to Adelaide first, but then off to Sydney to the Passive House conference, the South Pacific Passive House conference next week. And you're hanging out in Seattle, but you're going to be there as well.
That's right.
Virtually.
Yeah, right. I'm Zack Semke in beautiful sunny Seattle. It's amazing, and I will be virtually in Sydney on Friday my time, Saturday your time.
Really enjoyed this interview. You've been traveling around a little bit in your part of the world. Went to NYSERDA event recently.
Passive House Accelerator co-presented the award ceremony for the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Round 3 awards. Very exciting to do. It was in New York at the Center for Architecture there at AIA New York's space. And all sorts of winning projects and project teams were featured there, including work by our guest for this podcast, Sara Bayer, who is with Magnusson Architecture and Planning. They won several awards, and then Sara was also a featured speaker, kind of like the keynote speaker for this event. So it was fun to catch up with her.
Right. Yeah, well, I really enjoyed listening to it. It's just some really good ideas and some really great comments. So we'll get stuck into that. But before we do, shout out to some sponsors.
Yeah, that's right. So everything we do at the Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to generous support from our sponsors. So our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And all these sponsors have allowed us to get to the place today where we are reaching just about 250,000 downloads of the Passive House podcast now, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. And you did mention during this some videos, and you've recently launched a new channel.
Yeah, we did. Thanks for bringing that up. So we just launched a sister channel to our existing YouTube channel. The sister channel is called Reimagine Buildings. So our existing Passive House Accelerator YouTube channel is like an archive and library of all of the Zoom events that we've done, the great presentations that we've been able to host over the last few years. Reimagine Buildings is all about video that's created for video. So the very first iteration or very first piece of content that we published this week is a Passive House Explained in under 4 minutes piece. And then the second is the first episode of a series we're calling Passive Pads, which is a tour of Michael and Diane Ingwe's retrofit of their Brooklyn brownstone home. Check it out. Subscribe. It's really fun to be doing this work. We're able to do this because we have a full-time video producer at the Accelerator now, Alex Wittek, and he's doing great work. So check it out.
It's awesome stuff. I think most people will be familiar with the old Passive House in 90 seconds, which pops up on many websites around the place. and Accelerator is now producing some fresh content. So those videos will be great for sharing with potential clients and sharing with other people to get them up to speed on the basics. And it's really highly produced, really good quality. So yeah, definitely go and have a look. It should be super awesome stuff. Really looking forward to seeing that grow. All right, well, let's get into this week's episode, shall we? We'll jump straight in.
I am super excited to have Sara Bayer here. She's the Associate Principal and Director of Sustainability at Magnusson Architecture and Planning. Sara, welcome to the Passive House podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And as we were just discussing before this recording, we just got to see each other in person for the first time. We've been interacting a lot online on Zoom for the COVID period. But just last month got to be at the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Round 3 awards ceremony, where you played a pivotal role. You were one of the main speakers talking about your work and the importance of Buildings of Excellence and the program and the work. So really great to see you there. And thanks for your really insightful comments.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great moment. It felt like a really important milestone for our progress towards a carbon neutral built environment. And, it was really great to see everyone in person. And I tried to distill in that short speech I had to kind of, what an amazing contribution Passive House has made to energy efficiency. And at the same time, giving us healthier buildings, which we really deserve and need. Just how much more reliable Passive House energy modeling is than compared to other energy modelings in the past, and what a huge advantage and a huge leap that represents towards our efforts.
Yeah, and how important that is with all the with Local Law 97 coming down the pike and people needing to figure out how to dial in a predictable, way better performance and in a predictable way. It's super helpful to have tools like that provide some certainty. Well, that's I think a good preview to what we're going to discuss very soon. But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into architecture, how you discovered Passive House, all of that?
Sure. So I've always been interested in math and science since I was a little kid, and I was even going to major in math through a little bit of college, but then realized it wasn't quite for me. And I had a bunch of other interests too, like art and anthropology. So a guidance counselor actually recommended that I look at architecture. It hadn't even occurred to me. And it's just one example of how much gratitude I feel towards lots of people who've helped me along the way. I still read a lot about math and science, and I'm super excited about all the developments that I see happening in those fields. They're all extremely interesting. Like, for example, how we're just now understanding this whole fifth kingdom of mycelium, the whole entire kingdom of existence that we're more deeply understanding, that really, and how it really contributes to the other systems, and how we can, with that deeper understanding, make better choices about the resources and efforts that we do. And then I stuck with architecture because I realized that we have a lot of input and can help humans and our societies manage resources a lot. And we have a huge responsibility for managing those resources through architecture. And I wanted to be a part of helping us improve those.
I mean, I think we've all heard the statistic of buildings being responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And I think that number probably applies elsewhere. But in cities like New York, the number is even higher, like more like 80%. I'm not exactly sure the precise number in New York City, but it's very high. So the work that you're doing is is very important to the role that New York may or may not play in being this example of how to address climate change in buildings. So it's exciting to watch, and it's why you were honored, I think, to speak at the awards ceremony, because the role that you're playing at the center of all this cutting edge work. It must be exciting to be in that space.
Yeah, it is. It is really exciting to be the center of all this development, and affordable housing, which is what our firm focuses on. Been lucky enough to help be at that forefront in New York in particular, because we have a few things going for us. We have quite mission-driven clients who want the best, for the people they serve, and they really value the quality of life benefits that come from building sustainably and building passive house buildings. And we've also had extremely smart and strategic regulatory support. So we've been always required to follow Enterprise Green Communities, which has required us to do energy modeling, so we can actually see what the impacts of our decisions are. And we have that number to talk about with the clients, even if that modeling until recently hasn't been passive house modeling. It's still been very useful for that discussion. And then we've also had incentives, strategic incentives for affordable housing, for energy efficiency, from the housing agencies as well as NYSERDA. And then, of course, we've also had the cost constraints on all these projects. So, it's not, we have to really justify the reasons for the expense and also show how many other synergistic benefits come from a passive house decision. And you said about 40% of our greenhouse gas in countrywide comes from buildings. I also feel like architects can help make spaces that inspire people to address the other 60% of the emissions. So, from transportation, or even just giving them opportunities to recycle or compost, making that our buildings are such a big part of our infrastructure, and how we design them and how we, make them inspiring in different ways can help people, think about these other aspects of their lives more deeply.
Yeah, I can see that you feel the purpose very deeply as well. How did you learn about passive house in the first place? Like, what was that? How did that discovery happen?
I got to Magnusson Architecture and Planning with sustainability in my mind, and I was LEED certified. But I always had this feeling that there must be another way to really get lower energy use. And I didn't know what that was, but another person in our office was passive house certified, and I just happened to be working with this person on the project I was assigned to when I first came there. So he introduced me to passive house, and I said, bingo, this is what I've been waiting for. So I tried to get trained as soon as possible, and found lots of other people who were passionate about it, and realized what an amazing community it is, and growing too, of course, and how much knowledge you can get from all the very generous people who are interested in passive house. So that's how the trajectory happened.
As an architect and who is trained in passive house and now doing a lot of passive house work, how has it changed your approach to architecture?
I definitely visualize air, thermal, and vapor flows in a building more graphically in my head. I probably see that just as much as I see the structural transfer of loads and design aspects. So yeah, it's really kind of, it's been wonderful for a person interested in math and science that kind of, reveals, I find like those disciplines reveal deep secrets of existence. And, that really keeps me going. And I also found that Passive House does that as well in its own way, like the Wolfie modeling. You can see it's a model, but it's like all of our other models, like calculus, it's our language of interpreting the universe. But you can see the moisture and thermal flows through a wall, and it's sort of like magic. So when I design, I see all those. I try to see all those flows, and really, and also that red line of the air barrier. I look for it everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, because that's the real key, and I'm not sure that it's we need to keep amplifying that message that is what's making Passive House different. I mean, at one of its very core identities is that air barrier. It's just amazing how much benefit can come from quality control of that single layer. Hats off to the originators of Passive House for,
well, it comes back to science. Yeah, it comes back to science. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Physics.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish more of it was incorporated into our architectural education. I mean, we do have building science, of course, but, I didn't realize that something could be airtight and vapor open. That does I wish I had learned that, because the vapor molecules are smaller than the air molecules, so you can make something. Right. So I have to translate all these big concepts into simple rules for myself to remember them. And that really helps me to, keep that core vision of what those rules are as I encounter all these other problems and other scenarios around the project that need solving. If you keep your eye on what is the really basic principles that I need to hold on to or understand, that helps you then play with them.
Having that grounding and sort of guiding some guiding principles or North Stars to come back to as you're navigating all of the myriad kind of challenges and design puzzles that I'm sure you're working on with each project. That's cool. So speaking of projects, and we were talking about the Buildings of Excellence Round 3, and I should say that there's a recording of that event on the Passive House Accelerator YouTube channel, and so listeners can take a look and take in your remarks as well, and get a sense of the overall Buildings of Excellence program that NYSERDA runs. And it's playing a really pivotal role in showing proof of concept that these great buildings, and many of them now are Passive House. I think the majority are Passive House buildings, are possible and doable. And then just, I think, as you all, the practitioners in New York, are doing more of these Buildings of Excellence projects, the overall kind of knowledge base and kind of capacity of the architectural and construction community to achieve Buildings of Excellence is also increasing. So it's really exciting to see. So with that long preamble, what could you tell us a little bit about your recent Buildings of Excellence projects, and because I know that MAP was the recipient of some awards.
Yeah, well, we won 2 demonstration project awards and have 2 early study phase projects as well. So the 2 demonstration projects are Highbridge and Livonia C3. And Highbridge is a quite large building with over 100 affordable apartments and over 170 supportive apartments and shelter units and a treatment center. And it's right off of a bluff at the Harlem River. So it's a wonderful location that includes a lot of landscaping work with native plants and therapeutic gardening, composting and chicken coop. One extremely important aspects for people living there to have access to. They wouldn't normally. And of course, all electric, passive house designed building. So hopefully we start construction the end of next year or so. And then Livonia is a senior building, affordable, that's kind of on the edge of a flood zone, not in the flood zone, but at the edge. And there's a senior center in that building as well. And it's kind of envisioned as a place of resilience. So, with the passive house enclosure providing more resilience. And we're also looking into a battery for part of the resiliency loads, but whether it's a generator or a battery, that's kind of still being worked out. Of course, the battery question is something that the city is, keep still working on. But it's seen as if something happens in the neighborhood with a flood, it can be a place where people could go with a large community center there. So they each kind of have their own flavors, but they're both all electric and both passive house, which is the central core principles to them. And then the Buildings of Excellence, the early design study is for two other buildings that are in SD. They're both senior buildings, actually, that we're really trying to build capacity in our firm, in all the other firms we work with, all of our consultants, and the owners as well, to really try to study the big questions of why is not every project becoming a passive house right off the bat. I mean, we want to sort of do some studies, experiments to prove the ROI, and really demonstrate the health benefits. So this is really both the demonstration project process and also the early design process have been extremely important R&D opportunities for us. I mean, otherwise, you don't really have the chance to explore these ideas as a firm. I mean, our margins are pretty tight.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So having that the support for the design phase gives you a little breathing room to dive deeper.
Yeah. It's and we've had some of these questions for years. It's just astounding to me, actually, that ERVs are not required by code for multifamily. I'm not sure where the fresh air is actually really coming from.
Right.
But no one really wants to go and study their existing building and show how bad it is.
Right.
So we're going to try to model that.
This theme of resilience and health is just becoming, so obviously important with the impacts of climate change. We're definitely feeling it here in Seattle with the wildfire season. There was never a wildfire season before. This is something that started a few years ago, and it's really toxic, horrible air that we need to not be breathing. And you choose between either breathing, if you are in an old house that has not been retrofitted and does not have filtered fresh air, then you're choosing to be in a hypoxic environment with super high CO2 levels because everything is closed up, or you're breathing smoke. So it's that I think that kind of back to the ROI. I mean, I don't know exactly how to quantify it, but I think that people will feel like their health is pretty important and worth investing in. So these conversations of like 2%, it's 2% more, I don't want to do it. It's like, that's just not, probably not going to be the case. So, but what in terms of what you're finding, I mean, maybe it's probably early days with this R&D work that you're doing. But what are some of the kind of insights that you see emerging around ROI on for these affordable housing and senior projects?
Well, we definitely think that the basic ROI of, okay, this is the upfront cost, and then these are the energy savings over time, really prove themselves out very simply. But we have problems of some misaligned incentives, basically. I mean, we have developer teams that are a mix of just developers that won't stay in the project after it's built, coupled with nonprofits that will stay. And so, we also, of course, there's limited budgets to actually build these buildings. So, sometimes it comes down to a few percentage points if the project moves forward at all. And so but I'd really love us to think about these decisions as really a balancing process. This investment is so minuscule compared to the benefits to the whole project over its life. How can we trade it off with other things that might be not benefiting everyone so greatly? It's so. These two projects that we're doing the early study for have really passionate, dedicated, and smart clients. But it's just getting all of the misaligned incentives to work, and doing this balancing of how could we make this small percentage increase happen? So it's going to be an amazing case study example for us, I hope, and then hopefully the project moves forward like this too.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to reading whatever you all produce on that. It sounds really it's important work, and it sounds really interesting and timely. So, what's coming up next? What's on the horizon?
Well, yeah, I'd love to share all the learnings that come from these studies. We're also doing things like looking at well feasibility for our typology, looking at ILFI zero carbon to address embodied carbon for our typology. We're also looking at energy modeling with testing a few different softwares. We don't typically have that capacity. So yeah, I'm really working on taking the advantage of these early design studies to, build our capacity, and then amplifying what we learn. I'll try to be sharing them and packaging them in digestible presentation material. And of course, increasing our own firm's organization around sustainability. I talked to a lot of other directors of sustainability, and we're all trying to figure out what our role means, and how can we support our firms. It's also kind of mirrors what's going on in the corporate world, I think, with all these sustainability CEOs trying to navigate that world. I mean, sustainability works really well when you have an amazing firm as a base, where you've got good quality control practices and good, responsibility and understanding between different parties, and your projects flow at a normal pace, and then you can really do these studies and say, well, what if, and have these deeper, maybe sometimes uncomfortable conversations with people. Like it helps when you make your firm robust and able to stand on other things well, from the start.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, right. You have a really solid foundation in order first. Yeah. Well, I can imagine that role of director of sustainability is a really interesting one. I mean, because it goes from like, how do you define what you'll focus on in sustainability? There's so many elements, and what process is that something the director decides? Is that something that's a process with a firm? And then how does that plug into the practice? It must be, that's really interesting. I haven't really thought much about it.
We have a ton of certifications, and which one should we do? And
right.
Yeah.
And I think in the building decarbonization world, we're all learning too. Like, okay, embodied carbon, we need, this is super important. And what is we've had conversations about what's the relationship between embodied carbon and operational carbon, and that the moves that have been going on with electrifying everything. And I'm sure that in 5 years we're going to be talking about some other element that we maybe are not paying enough attention to at this moment. So it's never a dull moment, for sure. Lots of opportunity for learning.
Yeah, we're such a collaborative bunch, so there's always opportunities to learn more. And I listen to everything I can. I mean, that's kind of keeping your ear to the ground is one way to kind of stay on top of this thing. But it takes it's a good amount of time and effort to do so. If you have a small firm and you don't, feel like you have the bandwidth for it, there are lots of primers on Passive House out there. And, I would recommend just pick one thing. And if you pick one thing, I would recommend Passive House because it is so much bang for your buck, that air barrier. And lots of technologies are coming around that. And the other maybe piece would be to that pushback is a good thing because it will help you refine your arguments and refine your understanding. To never see the sort of roadblocks as the end of the road, and to use them to step on and go higher.
And that was Sara Bayer of Magnusson Architecture and Planning, or MAP. Awesome stuff there. Really enjoyed that, Zack. So as you mentioned, you caught up with Sara speaking at the Design Awards recently. And you were familiar with some of her work already?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sara has presented on the accelerator a couple of times and written at least one major article, probably more, for the magazine, and is kind of fixture of the passive house scene in New York, and really on the forefront of what's going on with these larger projects that are happening there. Yeah.
Really great stuff there. Really, there's lots of common threads with the origin story around LEED and then looking for energy model that actually worked. I love that. And having that experience from an interest from an engineering maths point of view, and really finding passive house being that reliable energy model, something that sort of is relatively common. I really like her focus on quality of life benefits. She mentioned health and as the main drive of their mission-driven clients tends to be around quality of life. I don't think she even mentioned energy efficiency, or if she did, it wasn't a lot. It really seems that health and comfort is a big driver of what they do.
It is. And obviously she's got the technical chops as well. One of the articles that I refer to is a piece that's all about evaluating embodied carbon and operational carbon. But in terms of focus on clients and the benefits to them, I think you're right. And I was struck also by this notion that she was sharing of affordable housing as being an incubator for passive house, like the affordable housing community and affordable housing projects have really helped put passive house on the map, certainly in North America. it's like, we have these fancy single family houses as the very first projects, and then shortly after, there are these affordable housing projects. And I think the reason for that is that there's this alignment with organizations whose mission is to deliver energy security and health and comfort to their client base.
I think it's a no-brainer in terms of housing as a total cost of housing, which has been a theme in the past. I think Sarah mentioned a 2% premium in some instances,
right?
Which I know can be tricky for a lot of developers to swallow if they're just seeing that 2% coming off their bottom line from a build that they intend to just on sell.
Right.
So it depends on that model. And I think that's where a lot of the challenge of housing affordability comes, is defining what we're actually pricing. Is it the cost of a build, in which every penny counts, and developers are very sensitive to anything that's going to increase costs right through design and build phase? Or are we talking about the total cost of ownership, which is where it is a no-brainer, but that's often not necessarily the mindset of developers. So I think having models of building supply that incorporate that ongoing cost are the ones that do make sense, to provide real solutions for housing affordability. Not necessarily easy, particularly in the private sector, but yeah, that is, I think that's one of the challenges from a policy and a development perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. That the incentives are aligned. We talk about the split incentive problem. I think is kind of the jargon for that issue, that for developers who are not going to build and hold, they don't necessarily get the benefit of the long-term benefit, financial benefit of lower bills.
I hadn't thought of the visualization of air and vapor movement before, but then hearing Sarah describe that, I realized that it is something that I probably do now that I know about the control layers and things like WUFI. I think she painted a really good picture from an engineering point of view. I could empathize or see in my mind what she was describing as an engineer, a structural engineer. You can look at the path loads of the structure and see where those forces are being directed down to the ground. And once you start thinking about vapor, air, thermal barriers, you can also do the same thing with them and see where things are going to flow. And I thought that was just a really great way of describing the mindset of a designer once you become aware of those aspects, because it's about the structure, but it's also about the envelope and those control layers. I really like that idea of just being super sensitive. And I guess once you see the air tightness layer, once you see a vapor layer, you can't unsee it from designs, or recognize that it's not there or not complete if it's not there.
Yeah, it was a really refreshing and unique way to talk about how passive house practice impacts design. Yeah, I hadn't heard it articulated that way, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah, and the other getting down into the real building science, the physics, even the chemistry, the concept of molecules moving, and this idea. And I also took a long time to get my head around the idea that something can be airtight and vapor open. And I think some of that confusion comes from things like people will be familiar with the Gore-Tex jacket, which is waterproof-ish when it's new, at least. It sort of has beads of water, but we say that, it's breathable, which is a little bit confusing because it's not, there's not air necessarily flowing through it. And we think of these big fat drops of water that are stopping going through, but air, and sort of you can sweat and you're not going to get super sweaty inside. it's a little bit different in what we're talking about in the building, because we're talking about vapor, which is very different from liquid water. So liquid water is something you want to control for. That's water barrier is one of those control layers, but vapor is gaseous, and it's something that can be restricted in its movement, and allow some water vapor to flow through a membrane without there being masses of just pure air movement and drafts. I'm not explaining it very well right now, but it's something it does take quite a while to get your head around thinking about what's going on there. And she mentioned the size of molecules. I think the other important aspect there is also vapor pressure, which we're really getting down into the building physics there. But that's another important driver of moving vapor, is that if you have a different vapor pressure on either side of a membrane or an envelope, that also helps that transport of vapor from one side to the other while stopping air movement. So there's quite a lot going on there. The good news is for designers that, as Sarah alluded to, while they may not have been trained and educated in all of that building physics during an architecture degree, there are lots of great resources, and particularly Passive House training now is a really great way to get into all that and to start understanding it.
And she referred to that example of vapor versus air as one of those kind of pieces of building science truth that she needs that is a kind of a touchstone in her work.
Yeah.
It'd be fun. It'd be great to have her do a presentation about the others as well. Like here are the building science touchstones for architects.
Yeah. The unmovable truths.
Yeah.
So much in here. I just want to finally, one other thing that she mentioned towards the end was that she doesn't understand why in their climate ERVs, but it might also be mechanical heat recovery ventilation in other parts of the planet, why they're not required, and that concept or that comment that she made, that's saying if one of those is not present, where is the air coming from? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such a good comment. It's a comment that could only come from someone who knows the way things should be, and then you become acutely aware of what's missing and the consequences of that. And it's true. We have that problem here, that ventilation is woefully inadequate in most buildings, as opposed to infiltration, which is draftiness and leakiness. I'd love to see more mandatory requirements for actual proper filtered and ideally heat recovery ventilation.
I couldn't agree more, as I sit in this ridiculous office of mine in this little funky building in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle.
Yeah.
It's just, the ventilation is just completely not provided in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Well, and as you pointed out, fire season never used to be a thing. But it is, and you've got serious problems now with outdoor air quality, and you need to still have fresh air coming in from somewhere.
Yeah. I actually just now I have this little exhaust fan, so I'll be when the next smoke event happens, I'll be sucking air from inside the inside corridor. So maybe that'll be a little bit better. And then I got my, have my filter system like running, full blast. I don't know. I may just have to go home again.
As long as you got your little aeronet or something, so you can.
You
can tell exactly how bad the air is.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it. Yeah, exactly. Am I aware? It's on my desk.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So much. I mean, I could go on. There's some other really great stuff in there, but so really, really cool stuff. So thank you. Thank you, Zack.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. Thanks to Sarah. On the topic of conferences, we're also in the Pacific Northwest. Passive House Northwest is having a mini conference focused on embodied carbon this Friday. And that's in person only down in Portland. So I'll be down in Portland, with Skylar and Dan Whitmore, and we're going to present about Skylar's work on that embodied carbon operational carbon tool, which will be fun. Anyway, it's going to be great to see the Passive House Northwest crew and the community on Friday. And then next week, Passive House Canada is having its conference, so you can check that out at the Passive House Canada website, and we'll include links. On the accelerator programming, this Wednesday is a first Wednesday of the month. So we have a 101 episode of the show, 10 Steps to Building Your First Single Family Passive House, by Josh Salinger of Bird's Mouth Design Build, who's also in the leadership of Passive House Northwest and based in Portland. So please join us for that. These 101 sessions have been really fun and very popular and successful. Good stuff. And then in New York, we are doing an in-person event on May 4th. So if you are in the city, check this out. This is a event that we are co-producing with a group called Brick and Wonder, and it's called Facade Renovation and Retrofits, Cocktails and Case Study. So there's an open bar and refreshments. So you get to have some renovations and retrofits and some fun with like-minded folks there as well. And please do check out Reimagine Buildings, the new YouTube channel. You'll by the time this airs, the first Passive Pads episode will be live, which I think people are really going to enjoy. Michael has a cool house.
Cool. Awesome. All right. We'll look forward to talking to you again virtually in Sydney next week. And we'll also be back with another episode and a couple of other extras, bonus episodes in this feed. So until then, we'll see you back on Passive House Podcast.